Good evening. I'm Hartford Healthcare's Tina Verona. If you are a parent of a high school athlete, wouldn't you like to know if your child could have an injury? Well, that's part of the goal of a new study at the Bone and Joint Institute at Hartford Hospital. Joining me is Sarah Emlaw. She's a physical therapist at the Center for Musculoskeletal Health at the Bone and Joint Institute, and she's joining us live with more. Sarah, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first, I want to talk about, this is interesting because this is sort of like giving you sort of a baseline into what's ahead if a child does have an injury. Tell us about the study.
So we're looking to get some information from athletes and how they're currently performing in their sport. We're going to be using some functional and dynamic testing to give us more information. A lot of these tests are simulating the movement patterns that they're doing in their sport. So if they are moving very poorly or maybe they have mobility deficits, then we definitely need to make note of their baseline, and we could even use that as, preventative tool.
Yeah, so you have this baseline and you have this information in this database, and a child then does get injured. What are you doing? You're comparing the injury to the way they were healthy.
Yeah, so I definitely relate it to if someone sustains a concussion. A lot of times now athletes are required to do a pre-concussion test on the computer, and if they get a concussion, then they have to go back to that test, and that's their baseline, how to get them back to where they were beforehand. That's the same idea of what we're trying to do. If an athlete gets injured, we want to bring them back to where they were before that injury, or even better
than they were. Yeah, let's talk about ACL. You were talking about research showing that this type of injury is on the rise. Why is that?
I think there's just a lot more athletes out there, and their expectations from coaches and parents are rising. So they may not be giving their bodies a break or as much as they used to be. There's so much studies out there that are looking at preventative measures for ACL injuries, but those numbers are still rising. So we're either still not doing something, or there's still something that's causing these injuries. So now we're trying to, ACL is such a predominant injury, so that's a lot of the testing that we're going to be putting them through is looking at the integrity of their ACL.
And once you injure your ACL, is it really ever the same after that, or can you get it back to the same with proper rehab?
So you have options. If you choose to not have surgery, then your chances of going back to that competitive level are probably a little bit more slim. That's why most people opt to have the surgery so that they can go back to that competitive level.
Yeah, and so if you do have someone coming in with an ACL, what's typical rehab for this type of an injury?
Depending on how the ACL was repaired, there's also a lot of injuries that go along with the ACL injury, so it could have a meniscal injury as well as articular cartilage in the knee. So it kind of depends on how the extent of the injuries that were involved, but they go through phases of recovery. You can't rush the body's natural healing process, but you'll go through the healing phase, then you'll start really strengthening, and then moving towards that return to play.
What are some of the requirements if somebody out there watching right now is interested in maybe having if a parent's watching or a student athlete themselves, what's the guidelines? What's the criteria for them to participate in this study?
They have to be at least 12 years of age. Obviously, if they're less than 18 or years old, their parents have to consent as well. But as long as you play a sport and you haven't been injured, and I'll say an injury that hasn't kept you out of the sport for 6 months. So as long as you have no current injury, you can participate in this study.
Because then you're getting an adequate baseline, right?
Yeah.
If there is no
Obviously,
injury.
If there's no, neuromuscular conditions going on as well.
And so sort of walk us through the study itself. What can participants expect going through this study, and what should they know beforehand?
Sure. So we're trying to get more out into the schools themselves. So we're trying to put ourselves into their schools and get their coaches, the whole team involved. Typically, we'd put them through a functional movement screen, which looks at basic mobility of the body and how they're going to certain movement patterns. We'll also be going through a lot of dynamic testing. Those are dynamic movements that you're doing in your sport, cutting, jumping, hopping. So that's going to give us a good read of how you're performing now, but where you may be after your injury, how to get you back to that level, or use it as, hey, you're having pain with this hopping task. Maybe we should see you in a rehab facility now so you don't get injured.
And I think this, the data that you're collecting that will be compiled into this database, I think will also help future athletes too, because you'll have all of this information at your fingertips to say, hey, if somebody comes in with this type of injury, let's look at the results of the study and the findings that we were able to take away from this study, right?
Yeah, I think this is a really important study, and I'm really hoping that it becomes, a national thing. Yeah. I mean, why not have more data for yourself so you're not guessing where the athlete should be after rehab? It gives you a lot of information, and it's easy to obtain.
Well, it makes so much sense too. I mean, when you think about it, and you think, there's kids that start out playing sports so young, even long before high school. Mm-hmm. And they continue playing it through their, collegiate careers, and even beyond that, maybe professionally. So it really is, to some, a lifelong commitment. So it is nice to be able to have that baseline that sort of follows you through your athletic career.
Yeah, and even just going, doing the research 1 or 2 times that I have so far, gone to the high schools, there's a lot of movement patterns that people are doing now. They don't have an injury, but it could be only a matter of time. So this is giving us a lot of information, and the functional movement screen that they're put through, that's a standardized test. So if they score a certain score on that test, 16 or below, then the research has shown that they are at risk for injury. Mm-hmm. So that's a great time for us to be like, I don't want to tell you that you are injured now or that you are performing poorly, but let's not get an injury, because injury is going to be a lot of time out of your sport. It's going to be very costly, and it's just detrimental on your career moving forward.
Right, and let's correct the bad habits now.
Absolutely.
As opposed to when you get injured and you may not recover from that injury well enough to play sports again. Mm-hmm. There's so much more to the Bone and Joint Institute, and particularly the Center for Musculoskeletal Health, where you're a physical therapist. We are talking to Sarah Emlaw of the Bone and Joint Institute. The Center for Musculoskeletal Health within the Bone and Joint Institute has a motion lab, and I find this really fascinating because you can really, whether you're a runner, a swimmer, a golfer, you can put them in their environment, mm-hmm. and then have them sort of going through the motions to see what they might be doing wrong, and you can really zero in on that. I think that's so key. Explain that for our viewers.
Yeah, so we can look at pitching analysis, we can look at running, rowing, we can do VO2 max testing, and it is awesome. We have 12 cameras, and they pick up on little markers that we put on your joints. We have a biomechanist that works with the computer and camera system to map out those joints. That way, when take golf for an example, if maybe you've had multiple injuries throughout your golf season, or maybe you're recovering from a shoulder strain, let's hook you up to these markers. Let's have the cameras take a look at your golf swing and see where you may be compensating, why you may be having some shoulder pain when you're golfing. Mm-hmm. So it really gives us a more deeper look at what's going on.
And while it helps you sort of get that deeper look, I think it's so essential for the athlete themselves, because they can actually visualize and see what they're doing wrong, as opposed to having a physical therapist like yourself saying, hey, you really shouldn't overextend your knee that way, or you're lifting your heel too high when you run. This way, you can actually visualize it and see for yourself.
Yeah, and it's definitely not us saying you're doing A, B, and C wrong.
Right.
It's, this golf swing requires so much torso rotation. You don't have that. Let's work on that. Mm-hmm. You don't have the hip mobility. Your hips dropping when you're running, more than it should. Let's work on that. It just shows us what we can work on, not trying to completely change how someone's doing it.
Right. And I would imagine the athlete themselves, after having gone through that, they probably have this, wow, I didn't know I was doing that, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And some people are so obsessed with their sport, you know, they're dying for that feedback. They want to know, how do I get better? What do I need to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's the anti-gravity treadmill also at the Center for Musculoskeletal Health, which is really cool, especially for runners. Tell our viewers about how that works.
Yeah, so the UltraG has been a really key piece of our rehab. A lot of people who maybe have sustained some fractures, and docs are saying, you know, let's start rehab, but only at 50% weight bearing. We can put you into a treadmill and start normalizing your gait pattern again at 50%. So you get into these fancy shorts and you get zipped into the machine fills with air, senses how much your body weighs and calibrates to that so it can take off 50% of your body weight.
Yeah, and
or, you know, a range from 20 to 100%.
Sure, and you feel so lightweight. Like you feel like you're maybe walking on the moon, I've heard some people describe it as. And this is something that's in Olympic training centers, you know, this type of machine and what we can offer at the Bone and Joint Institute, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's great. So what's your advice to athletes out there watching, and obviously to become interested or possible participants in the study? It is so vital. What do you say to those athletes out there? It's like, maybe I don't need this, but it's so important. So what do you say to them that might be on the fence?
Yeah, I just think about where you want to be. If you are a freshman, a junior, a senior in high school, if you want to go on to play in college, this is a huge opportunity for you to take a look at how you're moving, maybe, you know, work on things so that you don't get injured. You know, sustaining an injury takes a huge toll on you, not only the physical rehabilitation, but mentally, you know, you get this fear of, can I return to play again? You may even have some sort of depression if you can't be playing, not to mention the cost associated with it.
And that's another nice thing too, and a sort of add-on too at the Bone and Joint Institute, that if you do have that injury, like you were saying, you know, you might be a little skittish to go back on the field for fear of injury again. So we do have psychologists that work with sort of the mental health aspect and the nutrition aspect, because those are two vital areas in the recovery process.
That has been a huge tool for us and has made our athletes so much more successful in their return to play. Not only, you know, every time they come in the door, we screen them. Everyone has to fill out, you know, some forms that kind of give us some feedback onto, you know, what are they thinking about their return to play, or, you know, just in general, their mental health. How are you eating? Typically your eating habits. And then we talk to them about that during their evaluation or during their course of treatment, and we can make the referral right there, which is in-house.
Because I would think nutrition is obviously key too in preventing injury as well. You're eating right, you're eating healthy, you're getting enough sleep. All of those are contributing factors to preventing injuries, right?
Yeah, and if you're not eating healthy, if you're, you know, maybe you just don't know that you're not eating healthy, that's where the nutrition comes in, because you need those key nutrients, you need those calories. Your body, that's how your body recovers. And if you don't give the body what it needs, then that's going to set you back too.
So it's a real comprehensive goal. It's not just coming here for rehab. I mean, there's a whole comprehensive plan, sort of from beginning to establish, again, that baseline assessment. And then going forward, you can sort of really follow an athlete through their high school, collegiate careers, and even beyond that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This registry or the database is really to be kept as long as we need to. Even if the patient decides, the athlete decides that, you know, they don't want to play soccer anymore, we still have that information. If they go to another sport, it still pertains. It's all the same standardized testing.
And just one final question. The goal of this study really is to looking at injuries about how far out? Like 3 years, I think you said, 30%.
That's just our goal.
Yeah.
I mean, real goal would be to see this develop into a national database where everybody's using it, everybody's doing it. That's a standard tool that everyone's going to be using on their athletes before their season starts.
Well, hopefully this is the start of that trend.
I hope so.
Sarah Emlaw, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and joining us tonight.
And thank you for having me.
That. And thank you for watching. If you would like to learn more about the Bone and Joint Institute study assessment for athletes, high school and collegiate athletes, you can just call the number on your screen, 1-855-HHC here. Hartford Healthcare's Tina Verona. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you back here next week.